Hello, this is Alex Birkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. This episode is a part of our Kitchen Side series, where we pull back the curtain and show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, and brainstorming sessions that we have at our agency. In this episode, we dive deeply into the challenges of creating exceptionally high-quality content, the power of structured thinking, and how frameworks and deep knowledge and the vocabulary that comes with it can help you articulate your ideas more clearly, whether communicating with humans or with AI. We deeply explore the role of AI in content creation, specifically using our boots on the ground experience, and talk about how tools can augment our abilities, but still require human orchestration, intelligence, creativity, and strategic thinking to really pop and stand out. We talk about why some tasks in SEO and marketing are infinitely easier than ever with automation, like say internal linking and keyword research and deduplication, but also why that impels us to think about differentiation, why that actually matters now more than ever. So you'll hear insights on how marketers need to think like product managers. We'll talk about how vector embeddings and AI-powered tools can revolutionize your SEO strategy, and why truly understanding your buyer personas and your ICP remains the ultimate competitive advantage. We also touch on the barbell strategy again in the age of AI, talking about balancing proven compounding bets, safe bets with innovative experiments with high upside, and how to stay focused amidst all the noise about AI and automation. So without further ado, here is this episode of the Long Game Podcast. Oh, there we go. Speaking of recording, I have been doing the solo monologues for the content that we're creating, and it's really, really hard to talk just by yourself. Are you finding the same to be true?
I thought it would be more difficult, but I think it hasn't been because you mentioned earlier that you're feeling a little scattered. I'm also feeling very scattered, and I'm just like, I had this thought, I'm just going to record it and get it out and not overthink and then just do some editing. But I do have to do the pre-work of sitting down and having a couple bullet points at least. Like what I've been doing is I actually write my LinkedIn post and then I just read it as like in a video or like expound on it in a video.
Okay, so that's probably a better way than I'm doing it, which is I essentially don't look at the questions that I whip them up from ChatGPT, as you know, like I'll pull like a brief and then kind of extract which questions you would ask a subject matter expert. So it's not me coming up with the questions. It's sort of AI inferring what a subject matter expert would want to talk about. And then I just look at the questions as I'm recording. And I found that in one of them, I was really good in the one on high converting content. And I think it's because I actually had a framework. And if you can organize your thoughts in like a structured way, if this, then that, a framework, a 2x2 matrix, it's so much easier to explain. But then I just tried to do the one on content quality, which we've talked about on the pod before. And it's so philosophical and so nuanced that I'm like debating with myself in my answers. And I'm like, well, quality on one hand is sort of an equation that is like inputs meets the market because the market determines the quality, but you can't predict the quality based on the market because you don't know until it reaches the market. Yeah. So you have to come up with an objective standard, even if it's not the literal definition of quality. And then I'm like fucking going down this wild rabbit hole and I'm like talking for 45 minutes and I'm like, I haven't given anything practical.
It's just you going down these different rabbit holes and questioning your reality.
Yeah.
And sanity.
Exactly. So I think maybe it's like the type of content or the topic that matters the most, but it is hard. I think like one thing that you mentioned wanting to talk about is building yourself, and you suddenly realize all of the limitations and complexities of doing something versus like the clean and clear, this is the future and like everything's going to get revolutionized. And, the Tim Ferriss podcast, the guy, Chris Sacca, he's like, yeah, SaaS is dead. Like I can just whip up an easy app, like using Cursor or something like that. And you're like, yeah, I mean, a fucking calculator, but like not like a highly secure, private, like data privacy, like CRM platform that like an enterprise would use. And that's like an extreme example. But even when people talk about scaling content through AirOps or, like through whatever SEO tools and like GPTs and agents, it's like, there's still this component of like, all right, something has to differentiate or something has to stand out in addition to what everybody else can do pretty easily. And what is that thing? Like oftentimes it's unique data or like your unique insights. And like, there's still a very difficult task of pulling that and figuring out like how to do that in like a seamless motion. So it's like, that's what I'm working on right now. And it's not even at high scale. And I'm already like, yeah, this is pretty hard still. It's not like an agent is just pulling all of this stuff from my brain. I still have to sit down and think, what does this mean? And what do I have uniquely to say about this? And it's like, God, that was the hard part the whole time,
Yeah. And I think you're getting at two things here. There's a lot of hype around all these tools and they make it sound so easy, but it's actually still pretty difficult. And then on the other end, there are a lot of things that are pretty easy to do now, like keyword research, producing content. And the question is, how do we differentiate? On the first one, I'm actually witnessing that firsthand. So I'm going through this course that Nat Eliason put together. I'm going through it with Lisa, my girlfriend, for listeners. And she's never coded. She doesn't know HTML, CSS. I know enough to get by. And even seeing that small gap is kind of shocking to me because everyone makes it sound like, oh, you can just tell it what to build and it'll build it. And we built like a Pomodoro app. I built like a thing to calculate the time difference with different time zones and stuff. And when she was trying to build her own stuff, she started trying to set up like databases and like run Python on her laptop, and she had to install all this stuff. And she's like, I thought this was supposed to be easy. I'm like, oh, you still require some sort of technical know-how. You can't just be like you can't just come in cold without any knowledge of coding and how all these files work together and just expect people to build something. Maybe something really simple, like you said, but I think people on Twitter and LinkedIn make it sound much easier than it actually is, which you wouldn't know that unless you're actually trying to build. So I guess what we're trying to tell people is go use these tools and learn how to use them, but also like it's not that easy still.
Well, what does you have a background in product management, and what does a product manager do, right? Like you have some unique viewpoint on building software with Cursor, even if it's writing some of the code for you, because you know how to specify certain functionalities and think about constraints and like what you actually want to do. So I would imagine that you've got a little bit more granularity or precision in how you're communicating with the chat interface to get it done.
Yeah.
Right.
Honestly, I didn't even think about that, but in the way I prompt, I do get pretty specific, like, hey, use this, it's Tailwind CSS. It's like a React framework for like the React components to make it look a certain way. So I know to tell it to use this thing and set this amount of padding and like, don't change these things, but only change these things and set those constraints. But I think even in that sense, like you bring up the product manager I still don't really know how to code, but I was working with my engineering team and I would try to talk through pseudocode, which is sort of what I'm doing now, which I guess is a skill in itself. But the product manager role is changing a ton too. Like, Clairvaux gave that talk about it. I don't know if you want to talk about that, like the super ICs.
Yeah. I just think like, well, Clairvaux is incredibly smart, but like her talk was about how the traditional product manager role is dying. And the main takeaway was that the skill stack is going to collapse and like you're going to be able to functionally do what a team of people could do before. But before we dive into that, I actually want to talk about like how to get more use out of these tools. Cause I think actually the PM and like your viewpoint on how you interface with the tools is interesting. Because I got a couple, sorry for tracing back here, but I got a couple other ideas in my head in that I read a take on Twitter and I can't remember who said it, but it was something about how like if you had higher human intelligence, then paradoxically, like it's not what most people would think, but those people are actually going to get the most out of artificial intelligence too, because they're going to be able to understand like how to phrase questions in certain ways or how to chain prompts together. If you have maybe an engineering brain, like AirOps, right? Like that's kind of like workflow, structured thinking, like this step here, this step here, and like, retracing outputs and all of that. But I was thinking from, a music standpoint, right? If you could create a song with LLMs, and you can through Sona, something like that. I created you a song. Do you remember?
Yeah. Suno?
Yeah.
Is that it? Suno.ai?
Suno. Yeah. Something like that. And it's okay. It's like, you can't really customize it too much, but I would imagine that most people don't have a deep understanding of what music means, from like a technical level. And you can kind of describe, based on your let's say vocabulary, right? Like, I have a very limited vocabulary when it comes to color patterns. So I'm like, that's blue, that's green, that's purple. And some people are like, no, that's fuchsia, that's like verdant green. Like, they've got all these different words for like very small shades. And I'm like, what the fuck is the difference between beige and camel? Like, I don't know. And in the same context with music, like, if I didn't have any understanding of music, I could be like, hey, write me a punk rock song, not knowing that punk rock is an extremely broad genre. Mm-hmm. And I could say, make it sound happy, right? And that's like the most broad emotion. And then you could get clearer if you didn't understand music and say, I want it to sound like peaceful and content. And I want it to, have flavors of 1970s, like New York City punk rock, like the Ramones or something. Or if you're an actual musician, you could say, I want it to shift from 4/4 to 5/4 time in the bridge because I want it to feel a little jarring, and like it's not fully like a smooth motion. I want it to feel like there's like a sense of discomfort before it resolves in the final chorus. And in the final chorus, I want it to key change from minor to major key or something like that. And that to me is very similar to how people in the LinkedIn space, when they say like AI can or can't do certain things, if they don't have that vocabulary and they just say, hey, write me a blog post about SEO or about SaaS pricing, it's like, that's like one high level vocabulary. But if you didn't decompose it into what a great blog post about SaaS SEO is or SaaS pricing is, and you can't actually describe like what the quality that goes into those components and think through it from like a first step, second step, third step, fourth step, like engineering perspective, you're not going to get the same quality outputs.
Yeah. I mean, even using that example, one who had a little bit more expertise in SaaS pricing might say, make sure you cover topics like why usage-based pricing is flawed. Make sure you talk about like the benefits of why, like what types of companies should do seat-based pricing, and you're not getting into like telling the LLM what to write, but you're just telling like, make sure to cover these very specific topics that I know my persona is asking, like my target audience is asking about, which that's actually a very timely thing because usage-based pricing is so hot right now. At least in the LinkedIn circles I'm in. But it's interesting. I think people need to think themselves as conductors. Like if you're conducting an orchestra, you're not playing instruments. I don't know if conductors all play. I don't know. I'm not a musician.
They almost always have musical background, and they at least know pitch, and they can say like, "Oh, the tuba is like out of tune." Yeah,
yeah. Like you can't just like wave your hands and expect to get beautiful music. Like you got to know how things work together and like know what you want to get. And so when you think of conductor, they're like, okay, I want the strings to be louder. I want like, I don't know, the trumpets to be quiet or whatever. I don't know what the actual thing is, but they're not the one actually doing the thing, but they can see how it all fits together and they have a vision in mind of what they want to get out of it. Versus if you're just saying like, oh, I want some violin. It's like, okay, what about it? What do you want us to do?
Yeah. And would you even know like that you would require like X instrument because your vision dictates that would add to the emotional complexity of this section of the composition?
Yeah.
Like you would have to have that understanding in order to dictate that should be a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And even thinking about building apps, one can say, hey, I want to add a login feature into this app I'm building. But one could also say like, hey, I want to host this through Google Firebase and I want to use Google OAuth as like the login mechanism. And only people with this email address can get access. Like you're making me think more about the way I communicate and the specs I put together without even kind of thinking about it. Whereas there might be more broad prompts that are being given. But yeah, there's some of this stuff still requires thought. It's not just giving it some crappy inputs and expecting to get greatness out of it.
Mm-hmm. But I think you can obviously get like whatever the median output is. Like if you were a conductor and you picked like the most popular orchestra song of all time. I don't know what that is. I don't have the knowledge there. But like if you assembled a team for that, like it's a pretty prototypical experience, right? Like it's been done. You can look at other people who have done it, and you can just assemble the same types of instruments and the same types of players who would play those instruments. And you've heard it like 100,000 times. So you're like, okay, I kind of get the drums are too loud here. Mm-hmm. But if you're trying to do something unique or novel, that's where I think some of that precision and granularity comes in very handy, which like from a competitive standpoint, that's kind of all that matters, right? Unless you're just going to play, a pop song in C major with a 1-4-5-4 chord structure, which probably works and will work forever. Yeah. I mean, it's every Blink-182 song ever written, every radio pop song you've ever heard. But you kind of still need like to layer something on that's unique, right? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not a musician, but I love the feeling of like I used to dance, and so I listen to music very intentionally. And every now and then I'm like, oh, this song sounds like that song, but they layered on this additional layer, and so it sounds different. And you wouldn't know unless if you actually really listen to all these songs. And Lisa is like, I don't know what you're talking about. And when I'm thinking a lot about differentiation in a world where everything is easy, and particularly content, because there's tools like AirOps and all these other AI tools that let you create a lot of content. And sure, you can play with the inputs and maybe get something that's a little bit better than what's out there. But at this point, I think a lot of us understand how LLMs generate words based on what they're trained on. And so the question is like, what is that additional layer? Like if you're using that, what was that thing you just said? Like
1-4-5-4. It's like
1-4-5-4.
Yeah.
If
it's
everyone
the common
has
chord structure, major keys. Yeah.
Yeah. If everyone's following the same chord structure, like what are you layering on to differentiate your content? And we've talked about this a bit around, well, unique data, unique points of view. Like you kind of need to be thoughtful about that still to differentiate. And those aren't easy. And the phrase I'm kind of landing on is like differentiation by way of difficulty. Like go do the things that are a little bit more difficult, take a little bit more effort that maybe not everyone's willing to do.
Can you trace back, because you alluded to this, but you mentioned that there's some things that you think are easy to do in SEO that may be easier now with AI tools. What are some of those components that you think are easy or table stakes or essentially able to be automated with high precision, of course?
Even before, there were tools like Link Whisper, which is an internal linking tool for WordPress sites. Like it literally just tells you what links to add, and then you can do some searches, but you click a button and it adds a link for you. Mm-hmm. There are things that now automate those things too. You can use these keyword research tools to get a list of keywords, to cluster them, to get the search intent, to then produce the outline and briefs, to then write the content. All that it was relatively straightforward and easy. It's become even easier now. And so the question is, if everyone has access to the same data to prioritize keywords, if everyone's talking about optimizing to search intent, and therefore probably means that people are producing similar types of content, then where's the differentiation? How do you stand out? Let's assume that your competitors are pretty smart and doing the same things, which isn't always the case, but then great, you're optimizing for search intent. So are your competitors. Now what?
Yeah, we're definitely speaking towards like a more sophisticated segment of the market in MarTech and SaaS who are pretty early adopters on some of this stuff, because I do think like some of the table stakes is actually rare in other spaces. So understanding what user intent even means is actually
you're right.
Not probably the most prevalent thing if you're looking outside of SaaS. Internal links, though, I totally agree. That's one of those things that like we've thought about like building proprietary tech and offering it, to customers, like flipping it outward facing. But I think it's not a hard problem. It's not something that like is unsolved. Like it's been solved by like probably, I don't know, like 20 or 30 commercial tools. And then like anybody with a screaming frog, like a basic level of understanding what screaming frog is, can do that pretty easily too.
Yeah.
So I think stuff like that, even if it is underutilized or like under actioned on, the technical problem isn't that hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think there might be a certain segment of folks who still think these things are difficult because they haven't had the time to actually explore what it means to do something like maybe an internal linking analysis. And I think if we were to sit down and show them, they'd probably be like, wait, it's that easy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The hard part is execution. Like the hard part is like building into your operational framework a either automated approach that you trust to automatically implementing those internal links via APIs, or through like your own human processes saying, we're going to do this once a month or once a quarter. And here's the process by which we're going to make those decisions. The decision-making framework and the technical component is really easy, but operationalizing it and actually doing it is the part that I see lacking.
Yeah.
So maybe, I mean, that's probably still like, you know, like everybody now with LLMs can get like a custom diet plan. And we use these gym metaphors all the time, and a custom exercise plan. But it's still pretty damn hard to go to the gym like every day. And, you know, it's pretty cold and like a little rainy out today. I should be going to the gym, but I might skip, you know?
I'm going to the gym today.
So it's still hard to like do the thing that you know you should do.
Yeah.
What else is easy? I mean, like the optimizing for intent with ClearScope and tools like Surfer, I think that's largely table stakes, because you don't even need like really an understanding of the technical components of why you're including those keywords. You just get like this very gameable score of like 1 to 100 or like F to A++. And like you can just see that score and ship based on that. And everybody can do that. Yeah,
those tools are, I just have concerns about those tools and how they impact how content is produced. Like Bernard's awesome. I love Bernard. I don't know if he listens to us, but if everyone, again, is using tools like Surfer and ClearScope, what does that mean for the type of stuff that gets put out there? And how do you do something different? Like, how do you zig while others zag? And we've seen clients who each week they put their content through a ClearScope or a Surfer, and they're like, oh, we got to re-optimize this. And then at some point it's like, wow, this is literally just keyword stuffing. And I don't even know what you're trying to say in this article anymore. And in fact, it's not performing anymore because you're just keyword stuffing.
Yeah, it's funny. Like we always talk about how things are shifting so much, but like the same tactics are just wrapped up in new, more sophisticated terms and tools. But like keyword stuffing, buying links, like a lot of the same shit that people did so like many years ago, they're kind of still doing, but it seems more sophisticated now because you're like, oh yeah, knowledge graph, topical authority. And you're like, yeah, but you're still just plugging a bunch of keywords and related keywords into an article. Yeah.
Like I've heard, I mean, just to go on that line of thinking, I've heard that some companies do digital PR, but on a back end, it's just buying links and syndicating content, which that's not what I have in mind when I think of digital PR. I'm thinking original research, something that people will want to cover and link to and reference, not necessarily just, content syndication.
Yeah, totally. So those are easy. Keyword research is easy in the traditional paradigm, right? Like everybody who is an Ahrefs or SEMrush account can kind of do a content gap and analyze data by search volume and difficulty and CPC. So, and even to the extent like, when we talk about topics over keywords, which isn't revolutionary, first off, it's been talked about for decades. If you just collate a bunch of similar keywords that have similar SERPs or semantic definitions, then that part is not that difficult, right? To say that A/B testing tools and open source A/B testing tools, weirdly enough, have 80% SERP match. So we should just include a section.
Do they?
Well, I'm just making this up.
Okay.
Let's say they have 80% SERP match. So you're like, okay, let's just have a section for open source in the same page. Or they have no match and we'll create 2 different pages for those. Like that's a pretty easy, it's a discrete analysis that you could do and you could build a script for, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think that's necessarily that differentiating either, to know from a strategic level how to split your pages and how to do your keyword research.
Yeah.
And I may be wrong. Like, what do you think there?
I do think it's very straightforward. I mean, there are actually tools that help you look at this SERP overlap and make that decision. And I mean, if there's like a 50% similarity, it could go either way, but those don't feel like very strategic decisions anymore.
So what's the value add? I think there's a million things that are table stakes. We haven't even covered some of the admin stuff, like reporting and whatnot, that can functionally be automated. But what's the differentiator when it comes to strategy? I would say ICP research.
Yeah.
And like formulating your content roadmap, and even the executional components of that based on what your actual buying group is saying. And then only layering on, SEO data or channel data on top of that to prioritize and optimize for the channel. But that's another one where I don't think it's complicated, but I think it's difficult to do regularly.
Yeah.
I think it's, again, like what everybody tells you to do is talk to your customers, but to do so and to synthesize that into a framework where you're taking the things that are actually relevant and you're able to parse out what's not relevant. Because sometimes you'll talk to a customer who says some outlandish, anomalous thing, and you're like, okay, like maybe that's interesting, but like I have to have the taste and judgment to discern whether or not it is, and I should include that in my data or not. But to do that regularly and to actually base your strategy on that foundational layer, that seems to me to be a differentiator.
Yeah, it's definitely, to me, it seems to always go back to be as close as you can be to your target market and audience and like really listen to them. And it's funny because I remember when Mark was on the pod, he was saying when he was interviewing like product managers versus marketers, when you ask a product manager, what would they do in their first 30 days? They're like, get on the call with a bunch of customers. When you interview marketers and ask the same question, they're like, I would start doing a lot of research, like keyword research or whatever. And he's just like, wait, but aren't marketers the ones saying you should talk to your audience? And so there's difficulty in that. It's challenging to reach out to clients and schedule a call and have interview questions ready and feel like you have the right questions to understand what their pain points are and everything. And perhaps there's a different skill set or a different profile in those different people. But I also have this philosophy that marketers and SEOs should be moving to become more like product managers. Like you said, that skill set or the skill stack is flattening. I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, I can let me take over here.
Take over.
The talking to your customers is important for like many reasons, but an example that came to my mind is roping together this idea of like the on-page SEO components. And like, if you use something like SERP analysis, manual or through ClearScope or something, and you're writing an article about attribution because you found that has a lot of search volume. First off, like it doesn't necessarily mean that your ICP cares about it, but let's assume that you also did like a little interview tour and you found that like attribution, like we did in our marketing leader tour, right? Like a lot of people are talking about attribution.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to write an article about attribution and you sell some software that helps you like like track touch points in like a non-linear way. So it's like a different paradigm from like last click. So it maps onto your product and ICPs are talking about it and their search volume. Well, now when you pass that to the writing team and you give them a ClearScope report and an outline, if you reverse engineer what's already been talked about, what you're going to get is essentially what Google Analytics documentation said and whatever like WordStream wrote about in 2016, which is you're going to outline, okay, what is attribution? It's a system to assign varying credit to different touch points in the customer journey for typically marketing and mostly performance channels to dictate like budget, allocation of resources, et cetera, to make better decisions. And then you're going to get first click, last click, time decay, linear, and you're going to get all of these common models, right? But then if you actually talk to a CMO, in my interviews, they haven't actually mentioned first click versus last click. What they've talked about is how to align their sales-led motion with their marketing engine, which includes both demand generation and brand. And how do we build a model that actually encompasses all of that, which kind of goes beyond last click, first click, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't have known that unless you talked to the person who's making those decisions, right? It's actually a much more nuanced and interesting topic than the simplistic models that most people have talked about. So it's going to dictate a better, and this is where we get into like content quality. I think this is actually a differentiator, is like knowing that insight that can't easily be gleaned from past research or like doing a book report on what's already existed, and actually identifying like, you don't even have to have a solution, but what is the thing that people are talking about? What is the problem they haven't solved yet?
Yeah.
Because surely they've read one or two of those articles in the past, right? Like they kind of know like, what first click means, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. CMOs aren't trying to read what is attribution.
Hopefully not. So let's talk about what you're building and your experiences, and kind of like, you know, the boots on the ground concept of like go back to, you know, you and Lisa working through these products.
Yeah. I guess I haven't gotten to like finish building something yet, but like I'm getting to good stopping points. So one example is I'm taking this course from Brittany Muller, who is like ex-Moz, ex-Hugging Face, and doing a lot of stuff around AI, and particularly like AI in marketing and SEO right now. And one of the projects was building this, actually we talked about internal linking. So building an internal linking analysis tool that uses Screaming Frog, a script for data cleaning that data from Screaming Frog, a script for turning, actually it's not a script, but it uses Screaming Frog to turn each page into a vector embedding, which to me was a very, it was an abstract concept that I didn't really know what a vector embedding was. But you take those vector embeddings and use them to understand which pages are semantically related, and then you use another script to then say, find all the 5 other semantically related pages that should be linking to this target page. Now, historically, if you use a tool like Hrefs, it does like exact match anchor text only. If you manually tagged website URLs by category, what you thought was a category, it may not actually be based on a content itself, which maybe there's some room for fuzziness where you might get some right and a few wrong, but I don't think that's the biggest issue. But I think where this is really interesting is I did all of that in like 30 minutes to an hour. Like there are provided scripts that you can find online. You can use Google Colab to help troubleshoot bugs and everything. And I think just the power of understanding what a vector embedding is going to help marketers in general. Because now you can, instead of reading every single article to understand a context, you can use vector embeddings to use AI to understand how all pages are related. And so vector embeddings, I should explain what that is. Like if you look at a single page and compare it to another page, each one has a different layout. It has a different set of words on it. And what vector embeddings are is it turns that set of elements on a page, or like words and strings, characters on a page, turns into a unique string of characters. Like that is a vector embedding. And then for this other page, it also does the same thing. So just think of all content turning into a string of randomized letters and characters. And AI can then be like, hey, this set of strings is related to this set. So it's like using the different entities in a content.
Like that's codification system. And then you could run an LLM or some sort of analysis to figure out the similarity between those.
Yes. Yeah. It's like a mathematical representation. And then what you end up doing is like, let's say a vector embedding is made up of 3 axes, like X, Y, Z. If you have a website with thousands or tens of thousands of pages, you can put all those vector embeddings into a tool and actually visualize all the semantic relationships across the site. And you can be like, oh, all these pages should be linking to each other, and then do an analysis and be like, wait, they're not linking to each other. Why aren't they linking to each other? We should, if that's our topical cluster based on what the pages are actually about, but we're missing internal links, then Google's not going to it's going to take more time to identify that that's a topic cluster we're an authority in. So I'm getting a little bit into weeds, but these are things that a couple weeks ago, I would not have been able to speak like this. And so I think the takeaway here is if folks don't know what I'm talking about, definitely sign up for one of these courses and like get hands-on experience using these tools. Cause again, there's a lot of stuff that we see on LinkedIn and Twitter that is hype, and it's hard to really understand how it's applicable or like, great, what do I do with this information? But taking one of these courses and like getting that handheld guidance will help you figure out what those applications actually are. Because I think most things on LinkedIn are just like the future of AI and the future of SEO, and things are changing, but there isn't anything tactical. Like, what do I do today to apply these things to my job? What can my team be doing? And until you actually get that hands-on experience, you can't really theorize your way into applications.
Yeah, I'm tempted to go down the rant about LinkedIn people again, but I'm going to avoid that. The concept here is so interesting because it's like this data collection and analysis method that I could see actually impacting. Not that internal linking is a small decision. I think it's actually on the margins quite important for SEO, especially if you've got a big content library. But I could see it making the baseline of bigger decisions on like a website strategy and web product management standpoint. From like you mentioned categories, so like if you have like a subfolder, let's say like for example our website, we talk about SEO, content, and CRO. Just as an example, that's theoretical. I could go through and tag all of those pages, understanding that A/B testing relates to CRO. But then when it comes to, let's say, a murkier topic like link building, I would think that goes into SEO. But what if that topic is actually more about content assets that drive passive links? Well, that may be under content bucket from an analytical perspective, and not my human decision rule, business rule standpoint. So I could use that to actually create new website categories that would correspond to a better user experience, and bucketing those so people can find that information better in like a classification system. So if you have a blog homepage or something, you click into content or something like that. And then also mapping out if you wanted to build in recommendation engines. So I like to think past the first piece of content that somebody lands on. Like I look at it as like a landing pad, and thinking through what's the preceding step that brought them there, and then what's the subsequent step that would be a natural conclusion or a natural like next step in their progression. And it's not always a demo request. It could be another piece of content. So like in the context of a client of ours, like Gable, we create a lot of landing pads that capture known terms in the data quality space. And one goal business wise is to bring them into this next layer of a more nascent topic that is more brand POV centric and not something that people know about. And to have some quantitative score that says data quality relates to shift left data or whatever that topic is next. I could find that incredibly valuable from like a CTA or content recommendation standpoint.
Yeah. That's actually one of the use cases that we talked about in the course, where it's like, okay, maybe it's not internal linking, but now you can use this to power your recommendation engine of like, all right, which content should they read next? Or if they read this, what other related topics might they be interested in?
Versus, or possibly even CTA mapping, right? Like if you're doing like more of a classic MQL model and you've got like content upgrades or premium content assets like white papers or something, you could almost infer the similarity. And you could do this on like a top-down perspective, but it would be cool if you had, HubSpot's got like 1 million ebooks. And I think it was all decision rules that would say like, okay, we're going to give this social media calendar template, to this blog post, but like, maybe it's not actually like statistically the most similar. Like maybe there was a slightly different ebook that was like a social media checklist or something that would dictate that. And it could at least form the basis of a hypothesis for an A/B test there.
Yeah. I'm writing this down because that's actually a very fascinating idea. Because one of the things we found, it's again, you mentioned this earlier, but sometimes the table stakes things aren't even taken care of. But we'll see some websites and there's just no calls to action on the content. Like, hey, you're actually getting traffic, but you're not talking about your product or anything. What gives? And if you think of maybe HubSpot's a bad example because they're pretty regimented with this stuff, but let's imagine a site that's HubSpot size with tens of thousands of pages, hundreds, maybe thousands of conversion assets and like offers. It's going to be extremely time consuming to manually map which pages should link to which content offers. But if you turn them all into vector embeddings and created a filter, like, hey, for all these URLs that contain blog in the URL, identify a URL that contains /resources that is most relevant that it should link to. Like that's actually something you can do. And you can just auto-populate it. And then it might take some work, but use some scripts to insert those calls to actions programmatically too.
That's
I'm
pretty
getting
cool.
excited now.
Well, I like that this is kind of first principles is not really the word that I'm looking for, but a common sense thing that's existed for a while, which is like the customer journey and thinking through like the linear path of like, you know, which page goes to the next page and which CTA should we add. But then you're using technology to essentially make better decisions or augment your own human wisdom and intuition. And even classic methodologies like A/B tests. So it's not like, it's not revolutionary, actually. It's
No.
in some fundamental sense, it's what should have been, you know, done for a long time and could have been done manually. And all you're doing is applying this new layer of technology, which I love. I think that is the coolest thing. You're not like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're like, all right, let's like find a way to improve the processes that we were already going to implement.
Yeah. None of this is revolutionary. And in fact, there are probably companies who have already built something like that internally. It's just that now if you can spend some time in these like Python notebooks, like Google Colab, and taking some time to learn these things, you can actually build these things yourselves now instead of, I don't know, you might need a data scientist and ML engineer or something to build something like that internally in the past.
It is. I mean, I love this boots on the ground, like just rolling up your sleeves and figuring this stuff out yourself. Because I want to empathize. It's like really hard to make decisions nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard that from like all of our marketing leader interviews. Personally, I don't know about you, but like almost everybody's like, yeah, there's so much noise out there. And I don't know, like, actually, a lot of people have mentioned AI. I don't know about you, and we'll obviously talk more about these marketing leader insights once we collate them all. But a lot of people mentioned AI, but they didn't say, yeah, we're losing traffic or business and SEO. They just have this question mark that they're like, I don't know how things are going to change. And I don't know how much to invest, or like if I should invest more or less, or if our tactics should change. And same thing is kind of happening on paid. It's like harder, you know, and it's more expensive to spend here. And I just don't know what to do. Like, can you tell me what to do? Like, I'm hearing so much more of that. And even from our own business standpoint, you know, it's like, I try really hard not to get tilted, which is like in kind of a poker sense when you start to make like more and more irrational and emotional decisions, right? When you're kind of under the gun. It's hard not to. Like, because you hear takes like, oh, the agents are revolutionizing this and that. And then you kind of have to stop for a second, and you want to like not ignore this stuff, but you have to stop and think, what am I doing? Like, what am I trying to accomplish? Like, what is the goal of this? And you just calibrate that and always stay grounded in that and understand the limits of some of these new technologies. But it's really, I guess my main point is it's really hard to know what to do nowadays.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot. And I always come back to like, what do I know to be true? And what are my hypotheses? Which, I don't know, it feels like a very rational, dry way to think about it, but it's how I kind of keep myself focused and sane, just like with all the noise. Cause I definitely succumb to that, where I'll see a LinkedIn post about this list of top 10 AI tools. I'll click on all of them. I'll open up all those tabs. I'll look at all of them. I'll start signing up for them. And after going down a rabbit hole, I'm like, and maybe trying one or two, I'm like, am I actually going to go try all these tools and waste all this time? Like, I already have tools that do some of these things. Why do there's like some FOMO there. And then I just get back to the question of like, what's my goal? Does playing with these tools help me validate a hypothesis or anything? And I'm like, I don't have any hypotheses. Like, maybe the question is, am I missing something? But that's not a hypothesis. And so I'm like, all right, time to move on. I've allowed myself some time to explore. But so far, at first glance, nothing interesting here, so I'll move on. So I guess I give myself that flexibility to explore and see what the hype is, and then try to make a judgment call immediately, like as soon as I can, if it's worth investing time.
Yeah.
Like the Zapier AI agents, I stayed up really late one night trying to build stuff with that. I tried to build stuff with Crew AI, realized it was too technical. It's not as easy as people make it seem. Zapier agents was still very buggy when I was trying to use it. Maybe it's improved now, but I just had to make a call of like, am I going to bang my head against my laptop for another couple hours to try to make this work? Or do I move on and revisit it in a couple months?
It's really hard for people to understand the concept of opportunity costs. I think that's one thing that I'm very aware of is you don't want to get left behind, but also if you're completely tilted in the direction of the unknown, you can often like forego what actually works right now. And I think that's where I might do a redux on the barbell strategy. Cause I think the barbell strategy it's obviously like a general concept that we've applied to, allocation of content types within the context of an SEO strategy. But I think the broader idea of it is still extremely applicable in that you can still balance a portfolio of like how you're looking into the future and, maybe conjecture-based decisions. Like if you wanted to get into synesthesia or HeyGen, isn't that the video AI thing?
Yeah.
It's kind of unknown, right? And maybe that's like a potential hypothesis or conjecture that you put in that 10 to 20% bucket of maybe high upside, but maybe like zero upside, like risky activities. But you don't, and we don't want to forego what is actually in the present day driving revenue.
Yeah.
Because if we shift all of our attention to conjecture, there is a chance, like in the financial context, if we invested everything into early stage AI startups, like we might become trillionaires, but we might also go completely broke. And I just don't think that's a judicious way to spend your time and attention, especially in compounding channels like organic growth, right? Like I think like you can take your foot off the gas. You can also be paralyzed by the number of options and the new tools out there. And there's also a cost of not acting. There's a cost of like not continuing to do what is in some sense at least marginally growing your business, right?
Yeah. I think we've done a good job somewhat intentionally applying that to the way we're doing marketing for Omniscient too. I mean, we started doing content from day one. We literally just took stuff we had already written or ideas we already had and published it. And I think you did a lot of it in the beginning, just like an article every now and then, like maybe once a month or something. And we just knew that would compound over time, even if it wasn't generating traffic or leads now. And we're like, okay, cool. This is our main thing. We're not going to do paid ads. We don't have budget for that. We're not going to, we actually started doing webinars as a investment to see if that would work. And after a couple months, we called it and decided to stop, did the newsletter. And then that started showing promise. And like, you're still writing that and people still reference it and say that they get a lot of value out of it. And so we just slowly add these new layers in and test them out. And like we started doing in-person meetups and we're like, hey, this is difficult, but it's working. Like we're getting to connect with really interesting people. Like the podcast was a bet. And so I do think it's worth revisiting the barbell strategy because we've actually had clients who decide, hey, we're just going to scrap all our SEO budget and go do this other thing. All of a sudden we're like, wait, but it's starting to compound. Why keep some budget here, right? It's starting to work. Don't just turn it off.
Honestly, I see the potential for a case study that we could publish. It's good for us, but it's hard. It's a really hard channel to make work. Not just now, but like always. Like it's not like an easy thing that you just like put shit out into the world and, in most spaces get results. But like when I see companies who are like on that edge where I'm like, these are all the signals that you're about to do really well.
Yeah.
And then they decide to completely throw it away and pivot. I'm like, come on, like just keep going for like another 3 months. Like
if you decide not to work with us, at least like do something internally.
Dude,
like
hire
a little
freelancer.
bit.
Just keep going. Come on. Like just don't throw this away.
Yeah.
It's such a disappointment. Yeah.
Yeah, but the barbell is a very salient topic right now around, hey, how do I not get tilted and have my 80% of clear bets that I am very confident in, and how do I make space for this 20% of testing out these AI things or whatever new channels you want to try out.
Yeah, because it's still super fun to do that stuff, and like we're leaning heavily into that. But like from my viewpoint, like the things that have changed the most so far, and maybe will continue to be this way, is what we talked about in the last podcast with Mark, and then unpublished yet, but with Ashish, one of our clients, is that like a lot of what's not working now is essentially what wasn't working before, but the data didn't show that. So like really mediocre SEO tactics, like nowadays you're just seeing like that get washed away by all kinds of technological changes with AI overviews, which before that were feature snippets, and like that wasn't really what was working before. So now it's like you just have to be a better marketer, which is really good. And that I think that's why we're so optimistic about this time, particularly for SEO and for just organic growth generally, is like the concept of exceptional quality standing out, the concept of, calibrating like unmet ICP needs and research with channel data and your product and solution. And then even some of these things that we've leaned more into, and our clients thankfully are too, like original research, product-led SEO. That's a fucking hilarious one, because like it's obviously been around for a long time. Like if you look at Zillow and like these companies like Pinterest and the companies that have really grown as a function of SEO, as their product being naturally SEO conducive. But then now with like AI tools, like you have all these people who are like, oh, I can do a lazy thing, which is just like plug and play a bunch of content that didn't solve the first principal thing in the first place, which is the ICP undermet need that maps to your product.
Yeah.
So obviously it doesn't work, and you see that it doesn't work. And the thing that always worked still works, which is like you have an undermet ICP need that your product solves, and you distribute that through SEO. So it's just like, I think there's more clarity. There's like less ability to bullshit in SEO now. And that's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. And the thing you mentioned there, like I'll use that specific example of a programmatic play where you have a clear ICP need, your product solves for it, and you can do all that and still build a programmatic SEO like library, and it still doesn't work because you're lazy in the content. Like I spoke to a client recently, and they're like, "Hey, we're already doing programmatic. Like, why would we do that with you?" And I just told him like, "Yeah, I saw those pages. They're not performing. They're not ranking. It's missing a lot of information. And like, it's very clear how those pages need to be optimized, but it's not meeting search intent. It's not answering the questions. It's very bare bones. Like I can see what someone is trying to do, but they didn't do it correctly. Like they were kind of lazy with it." And so that like what the concern I have, because I want people to win, is they do the right things, but they're not doing it well.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't work. And then they write off SEO and say it doesn't work, but it's really, well, you just didn't do it in a way that would increase the likelihood of it working.
That's a good way to frame it, in a way that increases the likelihood of it working, or at least in the context of decreasing the likelihood that it like falls flat. And like there's kind of an entitlement in the idea that just because you do something that is properly vetted from a decision standpoint, that it's naturally going to meet market demand and work on a platform basis. And that's not the case with literally anything in life. Like there's always uncertainty and randomness, and platforms aren't always fair. Like the algorithm's meritocratic. No, it's not. It's not always meritocratic, right? And just because you're the best musician in the world doesn't mean that you're going to go platinum. And that's the same thing. Like you can do all the things right in an SEO context from a product-led standpoint. And for some reason, whatever the reason, maybe it doesn't pick up. Maybe Google's algorithm is fucked at the moment, and maybe eventually, that's why you have to have this long view. Maybe eventually it's not, and maybe eventually then you actually get that salience and visibility that you needed. But I think if you start from a first principle standpoint, in that like idea of how can I make this something that I can't lose at, it's like if you solve a problem for somebody in your buying group, it may not get like the massive distribution that you wanted, but it's still, it's like, one, if it does get that distribution, it's going to be much more effective from a conversion and engagement standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But two, you can probably find alternative ways to distribute that, So like if you're doing original research, maybe it doesn't go extremely viral and get picked up by, Forbes and whatever like publications people are looking for. But now you have this amazing asset that you can use for webinars, for podcasts, for conference talks. You could maybe put that into a physical like pamphlet or something. You could email that to people during the sales process. And now you have this really customer centric asset that you've created that you weren't extrapolating from like third party research like SEO tools, but you were actually pulling from the basis of I'm solving something for the person that I'm selling to, right? There's not really a way to lose entirely if you're basing your decisions in that fundamental fact.
Yeah, I spoke to an ex-coworker who is now joining a company called Koala, and I've had the CEO Tito on our podcast. And I remember when I spoke to Tito, he's like a developer by trade, not a marketer. But the things he was doing was like marketing 101, like back to basics that I think a lot of marketers miss. And what he was doing was he was getting on calls with customers and prospects and be like, what are you having trouble with? And he'd be like, well, here's the thing I'm trying to solve. And he'd say, oh, well, this is how this other CMO that I met is doing it. Like, here's exactly how they're doing it. Like they're integrating these things, they're using these data tools and enrichment, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you can use our product to help with that, but you don't have to. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to turn that into a blog post. I'm like, he didn't say anything about keywords. He didn't say anything about like organic traffic. He was just like, yeah, that's what they said they're having challenges with. And I figure that's what I should be producing content about, because if they have that problem, other people in my target market have that problem. And I was just like, dude, yeah, keep at it. You don't need any help with your marketing. But they've been growing, and they just hired my friend who, like, as their first marketing hire after so many years. I'm like, they've been growing this whole time without having a dedicated person on marketing. And I imagine she's brought on to help scale it out and everything. But that's just, he didn't lose doing that strategy. He wasn't optimizing for keywords or anything like that.
Yeah. What's the Y Combinator motto? It's like, make something people want or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, you could put that on like a billboard and just like tap the sign every once in a while and be like, are you making something people want? Oh, you're not? You're just trying to appeal to an algorithm? Okay, gotcha. Make something people want.
Yeah.
And like, you can kind of figure out, I don't know, like all the platform, the distribution stuff, like that's where a lot of like the, marginal, incremental, iterative optimization stuff comes. But I actually think that's, it's funny. It's like the stuff that people talk about the most, but I actually think that's kind of like facile and like a little bit easier to figure out as you go. And like the truly hard part is figuring out what people want and making like a high quality solution to what people want.
Yeah, I wrote about it on LinkedIn, and I know we're coming up on time, but like I'm kind of harping on this a bit because I have noticed that some folks are surprised at the amount of information we asked for and the amount of engagement we require from our clients, where the moment we send the onboarding email, we're like, hey, send us a list of subject matter experts internally on your sales team, on your client success team, your solutions engineers, give us their emails. We're going to schedule interviews with all of them because we need to understand the voice of the customer. What are the pain points? What are the exact words they use to describe those pain points? We want a product demo. Like, we want all this information. And some are kind of taken aback. They're like, that's a lot. Well, why do you need all of that? It's just SEO. And I'm like, like you think we're just going to go into some keyword tool and look up keywords and use keyword data to inform this whole process that you're hoping generates revenue, but that has nothing to do with your customers. No, we want to be as close as we can. Like, if we can't even talk to customers, but we know there's some privacy issues there. But if we can speak to the people talking to your customers, that's the best we're going to get. Like, give us a gong recording or something to listen to, And I think that's the difficult manual thing that we have to do to differentiate now when building these programs. It's not just, if you're just using all the same inputs as everyone else, where's the differentiation? Like, you need better inputs.
I really hate that framing of it's just SEO. Because I mean, Mark said this really well, but like in no other domain do people confuse the distribution channel with the thing itself. And in SEO, people do. And it's like, in no world would you confuse USPS delivering your direct mail with like the strategy involved in creating the right assets and creative for the direct mail. And I don't think people look at it like that with meta ads or LinkedIn ads either. They look at that as like a target, and even the targeting, the distribution parts include elements of that strategy and like figuring out who you want to target. But you don't confuse the delivery of that thing with the thing itself. And in SEO, those two have been conflated. And that's why so many people are like, oh, it's shitty SEO content. It's just SEO. But like, it doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And it probably is not going to work if it is in the future.
Yes.